Welcome to Asian American Life. I'm Ernabel DeMillo. We have a lot to cover today as we take a look at Asian American trailblazers, including my interview with Stephen Raga, the first Filipino American to be elected to New York State Assembly. Plus, we reflect on a dark day in U.S. history. Day of Remembrance, 81-year anniversary of the Japanese American internment camp executive order. Second chances, life after prison. Learning the ABCs of Mandarin Chinese. And get ready for takeoff. CUNY's aviation program launches new careers. This and more on Asian American Life. He describes himself as a kid from Queens raised by a single mother. And now Stephen Raga is making history. He is the first Filipino American to be elected to office in New York State.
To the best of my ability. So help me God. Congratulations.
History was made, not just for Stephen Raga, but for the New York Filipino community.
I'm very excited as an individual because I live in his district and I've known Steve for a while. I know, his desire to help the community and build a community for the people.
Raga is the first Filipino American to be elected to New York office. He's now the New York State Assembly person representing District 30 in Queens, home to a large number of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. I met Raga in Woodside, a few blocks from his house, where the 7 train rumbles above Roosevelt Avenue.
I was born here, but then I moved back to the Philippines right away.
Raga spent his early years in the Philippines, then moved back to Queens when he was 7.
I remember the language barrier was really difficult. My English was all right, but I had a very thick Filipino accent. I still remember it.
He also lost his dad that year to illness, leaving his mom Adela alone to raise Raga, their only child. Sadly, his mom passed away in 2019 before his history-making win.
When folks are like, who's your role model? I'm like, I want to say like some great public figure, but that's who you aspire to be. Like what pushes me in the day-to-day, my learnings is probably from my mom. A single parent, immigrant parent, she had to work 3 jobs, and I've seen her go through that process. So it's just a constant hard work and dedication for your loved ones, the community you care about, and I take that with me every day.
Raga did work hard. After graduating from Stony Brook with a BA and master's, he added an MBA from Cornell, an MPA from CUNY's Baruch College, and an MBA MS from Weill Cornell. His resume in community and government work is also a long one. But it is the community where he was born where he has spent most of his advocacy. He's a longtime Queens Community Board member. He helped organize the Defend Little Manila Coalition. He served as executive director of Woodside on the Move and was campaign manager and chief of staff for Assemblyman Brian Barnwell. In 2021, Raga finally decided to jump in and run for office, City Council in District 26.
I saw that our community, not just Filipino, but mostly immigrant, new Americans and working class folks didn't have that representation in office that's needed.
Raga came in a distant 13th, but he had another opportunity to run after his former boss, Assemblyman Barnwell, abruptly announced he was not seeking re-election. The Queens County Democratic Party chose Raga to take his spot on the ballot. The newly redrawn District 30 is 50% Asian. His campaign had plenty of support from the community and local officials, including U.S. Representative Grace Meng and New York State Senator John Liu, who himself made history more than 20 years ago when he became the first Asian American to be elected to New York office. Raga says he hopes to see more Filipinos follow in his footsteps. In fact, there were 3 Filipino Americans who ran for New York City Council in 2022.
I think it just takes the first person to show us that we can do it, it's viable, and we could really do good work.
Which reminds him of a story, a painting that recently caught his eye.
I'm looking at the gallery, and I'm like, oh, look at this one. So it's Jose Rizal in New York when he was here on the corner of like the Fifth Avenue, like near Flatiron.
Historians say the story of Filipino Americans in New York began with Jose Rizal, the national hero of the Philippines who came to visit New York in 1888. It would take more than 130 years, but a Filipino American is now finally a part of New York's political history. I'm Ernabel DeMillo for Asian American Life.
I'm Vivian Lee. February 19th marks the second annual Day of Remembrance of Japanese American incarceration during World War II. It is also the 81st anniversary of an action by a president that created American concentration camps. On February 19th, 1942, 2 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor by Japan, President Franklin Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066, requiring anyone of Japanese descent living on the Pacific coast to, quote, evacuate to a, quote, relocation center further inland. It was, in fact, a systematic roundup of anyone of Japanese heritage based on the fear that Japanese Americans would side with Japan as the U.S. entered World War II. These concentration camps, 10 in all, incarcerated more than 110,000 Japanese Americans without trial or conviction. Their homes and businesses confiscated, the vast majority of these incarcerees were American-born. George Takei of Star Trek fame was one of them, just 5 years old when he and his family were forcibly removed from their homes. The musical Allegiance, based on his family's experience in the camps, is now on a world tour.
The JACL applauds the government's decision to allow Japanese Americans to return to civilian life.
He spoke with Asian American Life last spring after appearing as the inaugural Grand Marshal of the first Japan Day parade to be celebrated in New York City. Takei referred to the spike in anti-Asian sentiment that made headlines during the pandemic as a chilling reminder of his past.
In the United States now, we have the recurrence of Asian hate and violence. Horrific. It was that same thing that put me in American prison camps in the swamps of Arkansas or in the high plains of California. Ignorance. Our democracy is existentially dependent on teachers who teach us the meaning of the noble ideals of our democracy. Rule of law, equal justice, due process.
In 1983, a congressional commission concluded that the camps were born out of racial prejudice, war hysteria, and failure of political leadership. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act that formally apologized to the Japanese American community and paid roughly $20,000 in reparations to each. Conrad Aderer, whose grandparents were incarcerated, is an editor and producer at CUNY TV. His documentary about the largest of the camps, Resistance at Tule Lake, challenges the prevailing view that Japanese Americans did not fight back.
I found out, there were Japanese Americans who were willing to say that it was wrong to incarcerate people, and then also, who were willing to protest against the injustice that was happening. Democracy and human rights are very fragile. They're really based on a lot of cooperation and agreement. And then the second that there's anything to disrupt that, any kind of political movement or any kind of pretext for fear from some kind of other, some foreign threat, these just what we count sacred as human rights can just be upended.
Resistance at Tule Lake comes with an educator's guide. Aderer's goal is to encourage more robust study of the Japanese American experience in high schools and colleges, not as a sidebar in American history, but as a major chapter with lessons for the future. Several states have already passed bills mandating AAPI history in school curriculums, including Illinois, Connecticut, and New Jersey. Several more have bills in the works. For Asian American Life, I'm Vivian Lee.
I'm Kyung Yoon. Asian Americans are stereotyped and often even see themselves as the model minority, immigrants who are all doing well. But that stereotype erases the reality of many struggling immigrants and children of immigrants who face obstacles on that track to success. I spoke with one young Asian American leader who's using his voice and life experiences to challenge stereotypes and to show the power of second chances.
My fellow graduates, my friends, let me remind you that we have an obligation to share our stories and to uphold the idea that if we wish to have a better world, as we all do, then we must first change ourselves.
When Sebastian Yoon gave the commencement address at a Bard College graduation ceremony, he was overcome with emotion.
For me, my family has been.
His journey to receiving a college education was not a typical one.
At the age of 16, I was arrested in New Jersey. Spent a year on Rikers Island. And for the next 5 years, while I was traveling from one maximum security prison to another, as classification drops, you just move from prison to prison. I spent the next 5 years sweeping and mopping floors, wondering about my future.
Sebastian was born in New York City and raised in Flushing, Queens by a devoted single dad who moved his 3 kids to Long Island when Sebastian was 10 years old. There, as one of very few Asian kids in his school, he remembers being constantly bullied for being a different race.
I hated school. The bullying seemed to never stop, and it just overwhelmed my experience within school, so that studies became a non-factor, a non-important factor. So one day, I decided to react differently than I usually did, which was just hide and cry at home. I reacted with violence.
He found that the bullying stopped when he used his fists, and feeling empowered, he resorted to violence more and more.
So feeling empowered, I started hanging out in the streets in Flushing, Queens, where there were more Asian American students. Eventually, we began with innocent activities like playing handball at the park. And then we started getting violent with other cliques. With the activities that we did in the streets, it led to going to bars, doing drugs, sleeping around, going to clubs at the age of 14 with fake driver licenses. Led me to a path where we became involved with the gang.
One night, a deadly fight erupted in a karaoke bar, and at the age of 16, Sebastian was sentenced to 15 years for manslaughter.
I was in total despair and loneliness was just overwhelming in prison. You would think that violence is something that people should be afraid of in prison. On the contrary, it is loneliness that kills people in prison, that destroys people in prison.
But in the darkness of incarceration, Sebastian found a ray of hope when he was sent to the Eastern New York Correctional Facility in Ulster County, New York, a prison that offered a rare opportunity for an education. Sebastian applied and was accepted to the Bard Prison Initiative, or BPI, one of the most rigorous prison education programs in America, offering a world-class college degree program to incarcerated people. The program and Sebastian were featured in a PBS television documentary called College Behind Bars.
Me gusta clase de español.
This is my dorm, my kitchen, my bathroom, and my bed here.
I studied history, anthropology, culture, and the ways in which people think and feel, the ways in which oppression exists all over the world. Coupled with the dehumanization that I experienced in prison, I think it inflamed a strong sense of will to fight for social justice, to not cause harm on communities, but to improve communities. So for the remaining 7.5 years of my incarceration, I couldn't wait to go home and do something.
But he worried that when he was finally freed, would he be able to get a job?
The reality that when I go home, I would be a felon. And that no matter how pure my intention was, no matter how educated I was, people would judge me as a 16-year-old boy who committed a devastating crime. So I was afraid by the time I was released.
Today, Sebastian is a program manager at the Open Society Foundations, one of the largest philanthropies in the world, where he co-manages the foundation's power-building grants for marginalized communities of color. And with the rise in anti-Asian attacks and violence, he's been using his voice to advocate for his own community.
We essentially called out leadership and we challenged our colleagues and leadership that if our values is to promote and fight for open society values, to seek multiracial solidarity, multiracial democracy, we cannot exclude Asian Americans, especially at a time when they are most vulnerable.
Sebastian also wants to remind the world about the power of education and the difference a program like BPI can make, not only for him and his prison classmates, but for society at large.
The recidivism rate, the rate at which formerly incarcerated people end up back in prison on a national level, is around 50% within the first 3 years of their release, largely due to unemployment. For BPI students, that percent is like 3%. People know this, politicians know this, and yet we insist on keeping alive this terrible beast that is mass incarceration, which targets marginalized communities, poor communities.
In addition to his work in philanthropy, Sebastian makes time to speak to college and high school students to share his story and to inspire the next generation. I'm Kyung Yoon for Asian American Life.
Embracing a language and culture is the goal at Yaya Preschool, where children learn Mandarin through immersion. This looks like your typical preschool circle time, but the sounds are something else.
When you come in, this is like you're in Taiwan or in China. Everything is in Mandarin.
In its inaugural year, Yaya Preschool opened its doors this past fall, offering a full-day Mandarin-only immersion program, the only one of its kind in Manhattan.
So 100% immersion means when the child walks in, all the books are in Chinese. Everything they see on the wall is Chinese characters.
And the only language spoken is Mandarin. This immersion-based concept grew out of the Mandarin Seeds language program, which Sarah Liu co-founded in 2008.
We live in America. All the children will gravitate towards the English speakers.
Which is just one of the reasons research has found immersive learning is more effective. Studies show that immersion helps the brain function like that of a native speaker, helping students to become proficient more quickly. Additionally, scientists have found that young children have an easier time naturally and unconsciously learning languages. Research indicates that babies' and toddlers' brains have a unique ability to distinguish and retain all language sounds. Yaya teacher Shelley Lee says even though many of her students barely speak English yet, it's evident in their actions they understand the Mandarin they're being taught.
Now when we do some learning station, I like speaking Mandarin, can you put the red on the spot? And like he or she like really choose the red one and put on the spot and you know, oh yeah, she is understand.
Teachers at Yaya use an experiential learning method where children are taught through hands-on activities, which are supported by Yaya's original curriculum created in Mandarin to avoid getting lost in translation.
I think it is important to think in the native language. So when we design our curriculum, our dialogues that I put inside my books are natural, instead of always worrying about translating from that English words.
Although the immersion model is designed to teach the children to speak as a native speaker would, the preschool is open to children from any background.
More than half of our parents don't speak Mandarin.
And for those parents, class material in English is online, so they can support their children's learning at home. Impressively, Yaya also has its own in-house graphic designer and illustrator who creates all the school's images, as well as its adorable mascot, Bao Bao, which means baby in Mandarin. Yaya's library also boasts a collection of Mandarin books from abroad. But beyond proficiency, Yaya aims to help students appreciate the culture behind the language.
I really want to give my son this, I think it's a gift. And also the more important, he can communicate with my parents. And also most importantly, I want him to go back to Taiwan and he cherish this heritage he has.
Mom and co-founder Yufei Xu used that sense of passion to convince her partner Lu to continue her original mission from Mandarin Seeds in the face of considerable challenges as a small business entrepreneur during the pandemic.
Entrepreneur is like someone riding a tiger. People think you're brave, but the whole time you're like, why am I doing this? I really want to get off. But always at the end of the day, it's because the smiles of the children and also these heartfelt thank you emails, notes, cards that I get that tell me and assure me, oh, I am so glad you're doing this.
For more info on Yaya Preschool, visit yayapreschool.org. For Asian American Life, I'm Susan Jun.
Queens has one of the country's largest Asian populations, and with JFK being one of the country's busiest airports, it's no surprise that aviation is a growing sector for this demographic. I had a chance to meet with some recent graduates of CUNY's Aviation Institute at York College who are working here at JFK. If you're considering a career in the air, CUNY's Aviation Institute at York College can help you reach that destination. Located only minutes from JFK Airport in Jamaica, Queens, the program offers bachelor's and master's degrees in aviation management. Our CUNY TV crew headed out to JFK to meet up with some graduates who are putting their degrees to good use. We started at JetBlue's hangar, where we found first-generation Filipina Diana Rodriguez, York class of 2017, and now a JetBlue aircraft mechanic.
I participated a lot in the clubs. You were able to attend the conferences and meetings such as the Women in Aviation Conference.
It was experiences like that conference and an aviation-related study abroad in Greece that helped propel Diana to blaze a trail and pursue her interest in becoming an aircraft mechanic. According to the career website Zippia, only 6.6% of aircraft mechanics are Asian. Diana says gender diversity is improving in the field. In 2021, the FAA reported that only 2.62% of certificated aircraft mechanics identified as female.
When I was younger, I definitely didn't see myself in the office. I can't sit down from 9 to 5. I remember when I first started here, I noticed that I was the only girl on shift. But honestly, with aviation, it's definitely changing and aviation is progressing. I've noticed a lot more, especially when I go to work. I look around and there's a lot more female mechanics, pilots, also gate agents, ramps too.
And before we parted, Diana did what she does every single day, popped open a hatch on an Airbus A320 to give us a whole different perspective on aviation, a perspective she wants to pass on to the next generation.
Aviation is so vast. Even if you don't like one thing, you just keep trying. There's so many doors in aviation, so many opportunities that you could do. If it doesn't work out, do something else.
Our final stop brought us to the Port Authority, where we found Stephen Gao, born in Fuzhou, China, who came to the U.S. with his mom. Stephen is your class of 2017, and his job as a wildlife operations supervisor is critical to airport safety.
We have a variety of wildlife at the airport. We have muskrats, we have herring gulls, we have laughing gulls, we have terns, diamondback terrapins, we have rabbits, we have red-tailed hawks, snowy owls, we have bald eagles by rare occurrences. They do show up at the airport, they do pass through the airport.
During the time we spent with Stephen, he demonstrated a number of animal control techniques that are used at the airport to keep both animals and travelers safe, but he credits his time at York College for helping his aviation career take off.
I felt like I love to travel, I love food, so I was like, why not give aviation a shot? You know, that's something that I could see myself doing 20, 30 years from now.
So if you're looking for a way to help your aviation career take off, you might want to consider landing at CUNY's Aviation Institute at York College. I'm Andrew Falzone for Asian American Life.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to tell your friends to watch Asian American Life on CUNY TV at 6:30 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Asian American Life. I'm Ernabelle DeMillo. We'll see you next time.